A French prosecutor says the truck driver who killed 84 people in Nice had expressed support for the Islamic State group and searched online for information about the Orlando attack on a gay nightclub. Prosecutors believe that man was quickly radicalized and had not been religious in the past. For more, we're joined now live on the KCBS Ring Central Newsline by Clint Watts, a former FBI agent and now fellow in the Foreign Policy Research Institute's program on the Middle East. Mr. Watts, thanks for joining us this morning. It would seem that this would be a very difficult thing and one that investigators have to research and look at very quickly in a case. Are these people radicalized or are they just mentally unstable?
I think it really comes down to the time that you talked about. I mean, this guy, like many of the others, have been radicalized in a very short amount of time. And any time I see someone that's been radicalized in a matter of days, weeks, or months, I tend to think that it's more about mental health issues and ego than it is actually about this devout ideology, that other story. But I'd also point out that, we are in this sort of dichotomous world right now with our media where people are either mentally ill or terrorist, and there's nothing that says that you can't be both.
Yeah, that's an important point. And of course, this matters because national decisions, people make voting decisions, all of these have to do with what they think is going on in the world. And if the narrative is that guy was nuts, that's one thing. If the narrative is he's an agent of some foreign power, that's something else.
Correct. And to say that he's an agent of a foreign power, I think is definitely a stretch. What you tend to see is, and this is the connection between directed attacks and inspired attacks, is the Islamic State will direct attacks and they'll tell others to carry out attacks on their behalf. And when they have success, you will see more success. I call them headline-inspired attacks. If this individual in Nice hadn't seen an attack in Orlando, let's say, that was successful, done by an inspired person with almost no connection to the Islamic State, then he wouldn't be likely to pursue an attack on his own. It's a lot like suicides or even school shootings. When you see one, you tend to see a lot of copycats and people trying to duplicate it. Doesn't mean that it's any less significant for the Islamic State. If they go out shooting and shouting, Islamic State at the end, it still puts a lot of credit to the group. But I also think it speaks to how we counter it. And most of the policy options I've seen thrown around after a Nice or Orlando attack would probably exasperate the problem more than help it.
What's your opinion on how the media is handling it?
I think the media is always putting things into an if or situation. For example, San Bernardino, the shootings there. Was it workplace violence or was it terrorism? Well, it's both. They were committed to al-Qaeda and the Islamic State's ideology for a long time, and they attacked their coworkers. In Orlando, it was, is he mentally ill or is this something over gay issues or is this the Islamic State? It can be both. I think the problem always comes down to the way stories are characterized, which is the Islamic State winning or losing? Well, they're losing in Iraq and Syria right now, which is going to force them to do attacks regionally and internationally where it would be perceived that they're winning. So it's much more complicated than yes or no or winning, losing, or ISIS or mentally ill. There's several different facets to this situation we have going on right now.
And of course, ISIS wins, quote unquote, every time somebody labels one of these attacks as having been inspired by ISIS.
That's a very short-term view of it. I think they win in terms of getting media attention, which is something they want. But no one's really addressed the longer-term impact of random one-time killings of civilians, particularly Muslims. If you look back at the history of al-Qaeda, 20 years ago, one of the things that they learned very early on was to avoid killing fellow Muslims, avoid killing women and children. And the Islamic State has not followed that model. And I think over the longer term, you're going to see the Islamic State actually alienate a lot of Muslims that would possibly be in their base. And I really think it speaks to our strategy of for a long time there, we tried to win over these vulnerable populations. We seem to be going in the reverse right now, which is isolating these populations, accusing them of things or connections that aren't really there, and then further exasperating the problem. Many of our policy stances or opinions I'm seeing put out during this election year would actually foment or accelerate Islamic State recruitment rather than hinder it.
Clint Watts, thank you for your time this morning. Mr. Watts is a former FBI agent and currently a fellow in the Foreign Policy Research Institute's program on the Middle East.